This is a video about franchise building, by which I mean the combination of world building, thematic development, and character development that occurs across multiple installments of a franchise. This is a subject that I suspect I'll probably be coming back to quite a bit on this channel. I certainly plan to cover the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and its innovative approach to franchise building, for example. But in this video I'm going to be talking about Star Wars and Doctor Who, and how they approached covering previous material from their franchise, which has been the subject of a lot of criticism. I'm talking about the level of criticism which transforms into a pop culture stereotype. I love this movie. It's successful on so many different levels. The third act is, in my opinion, one of the best and most memorable in recent years. One of the other things I love about it is how it dealt with some of the most well-known criticisms of A New Hope and Star Wars in general. But before I get into that, first I'll talk more generally about the film and the franchise as a whole. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is a prequel to A New Hope. Making a prequel to the first Star Wars movie was a brilliant idea, because it ties this new spate of Star Wars films to the original trilogy and simultaneously distances it from the prequel trilogy. In Lucas's earliest vision for Star Wars, rich and heavily populated central worlds of the Empire were to be the location of much of the action. But Lucas quickly realized he wouldn't be able to depict these on film the way he wanted, even if he had a much larger budget than what he was eventually given. The major limitation being the technology of filmmaking at the time. In the second draft of the screenplay, the protagonist's starting location was moved to a backwater, low-population, comparatively low-tech world out of necessity. As Lucas's ideas for the film developed, the impossible-to-create locations were stripped out, and the hero characters became more fringe types than he had first devised. A farm boy, a hermit, a smuggler associated with dangerous underworld figures. And Lucas knew that he couldn't depict the opulence of the central worlds of a vast galactic civilization, but he figured he could tell the story of the fringe heroes, because he didn't need to show those worlds to do so. He didn't need to show opulence. Far from it. To best tell the story of the underdog characters, he needed to show the opposite. He needed to show a gritty science fiction universe, a grimy one, a dirty one, scuff marks on the ships, fading paint jobs, junk lying round the place, technology that from the perspective of the characters was dated, and environments that felt very lived in, what has come to be known as the used future or used universe aesthetic. This was quite a new idea at the time and was very influential into films like Alien, which was greenlit because the studio was desperate to put out space movies to capitalize on the success of Star Wars. Before Star Wars, these very futuristic style settings were depicted as very clean and sterile. Incidentally, Alien took the used future idea even further, by extending it to the choice of characters, not just the settings and production design. The characters in Alien are all working class, and one of the key themes of the film is workers getting screwed over by their corporate bosses. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. It was a good decision for these new Star Wars films to take up the used universe aesthetic, because it ties them to the movies people love, and not the ones many wish were never made in the first place. They cemented this association with the original trilogy by adopting what you might call the Star Wars formula. A group of about half a dozen characters on a small, old, freighter-class starship, going between mostly backwater and obscure worlds, trying to stay one step ahead of a vastly superior enemy force that the heroes are at times either evading or attacking guerrilla style. This was the basic outline of the original trilogy and was influential for the space opera subgenre. However, it was not used in the prequels. That wasn't Lucas's vision. This turned out to be a bad thing though, since this formula has become so intrinsically tied to the very nature of what Star Wars is. Properties in the expanded universe, like the Knights of the Old Republic series, adopted the formula to great success. Those games really feel like Star Wars, and use of the formula is a big part of why. And it's no surprise those games made that savvy choice. The writer of KOTOR, Drew Karpyshyn, really knows his Star Wars. And he also knows how to write a great Star Wars saga that doesn't use the formula, like in his excellent Darth Bane novel trilogy, which is about the Sith and therefore develops its own structure and narrative framework rather than use a formula focused on a group of heroes. But what does all this have to do with the primary focus of this video? Turning negative criticisms of a franchise into strengths? Well, while anchoring the new Star Wars movies to the original trilogy was a really good idea, it did bring with it some baggage, the main one being the vulnerability within the Death Star. The way this scene in A New Hope plays gives the impression that the exhaust port in the trench leading directly to the core was a screw-up on the part of the designers, which messes with the suspension of disbelief because it seems highly unlikely that an intensely militaristic civilization spanning thousands of worlds and hundreds of trillions of sentient beings would make such a huge mistake. It's basically a lazy cop-out, sort of like the villain incompetence version of a Deus Ex Machina. And the problem with making a prequel to A New Hope, which focuses entirely on the rebel mission to acquire the Death Star plans, is that this is something that is going to be in people's minds. You have to address it. So they did, and the way they addressed it was brilliant. By making it that an Imperial engineer put the flaw in on purpose rather than by accident, they not only negate that potential criticism of a prequel to A New Hope, and the criticism of A New Hope itself retrospectively, they also gave themselves a compelling plot device that they could and did build the entire narrative around. This is very clever writing. And they didn't stop there, with the one that they had to address in order to tell the story well. They also took on some other criticisms of the Star Wars franchise completely voluntarily. For example, the very simplistic black and white moral lines of the original Star Wars trilogy. The goodies are good and the baddies are bad, and there really isn't much more to it than that in the original Star Wars films. Indeed, Darth Vader's betrayal of the Emperor at the end of the third film works as well as it does in part because of how black and white the lines in Star Wars up to that point were. But there's a good reason why those movies were uncomplex in that regard. They were love letters to the Saturday serials. Before television was invented, people would often spend the day at movie theaters on Saturdays, watching a billing involving a chapter or two of a serial, a format in which a single story is told over a series of short films. Also in the billing would usually be newsreels and the main event, a double feature. Lucas loved the Saturday serial format as a child, and he especially loved the Flash Gordon serials made in the 30s. He wanted to adapt them into a series of feature films, but couldn't secure the rights, so instead he made Star Wars, a homage to them, or more accurately, what would have been more of a straight-up rip-off, if not for the strikingly memorable production design based on the fantastic concept art by Ralph McQuarrie. Also, the iconic desert planet setting of Tatooine was a remnant of Lucas's earlier, mostly abandoned idea of making Star Wars a space western, since he loved western serials as well. Anyway, one thing about the Saturday serials is that they were notorious for having very simple good and evil paradigms. The heroes were uncomplicatedly heroic and the villains were manifestations of pure maniacal evil. So this of course bled into Star Wars as well. But Rogue One chose to hugely subvert this by making the rebels very grey characters morally. And not only that, but they used this device to help craft arcs for the main rebel characters in the narrative, like Cassian Andor, who kills a comrade in his first scene in the movie, then later his misdeeds become the drive for him to make the ultimate sacrifice.
Everything I did for the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget, I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in. A cause that was worth it. Without that, we're lost. Everything we've done would have been for nothing. I couldn't face myself if I gave up now.
Again, Rogue One is turning past criticisms of its franchise into narrative elements that received praise from its critics. And perhaps the most important way Rogue One did this, in my opinion, was in its emotional depth. Star Wars, like the Saturday serials it was influenced by, are more of the kind of fun night out kind of movies than the "it's just something in my eye, I'm fine" kind of movies. But Rogue One sought to be both of those at once, and given the reaction to this,
Your father would have been proud of you, Jen.
The rebel flagship is disabled, my lord, but has received transmissions from the surface.
Prepare a boarding party.
Yes, my lord.
I'd say they very much succeeded in crafting an emotionally impactful and satisfying narrative. And not only does Rogue One do this general subversion, they even did a different specific one as part of that. Here I am referring to the infamous Stormtrooper aim problem. They can't hit the core hero characters beyond superficial wounds like this.
I got it!
This is one of the most famous criticisms of Star Wars. And though Rogue One didn't need to address it in order to tell its story, they did anyway. Remember this part?
With the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me.
Chirrut was walking across open terrain in close range of these stormtroopers that the film had gone out of its way to inform the viewer were elite veteran troops. The way they are reluctantly introduced into the battle by director Krennic communicates that these are his best soldiers.
Sir, unauthorized access at the data vault.
What?
It's just come in, sir.
Send my guard squadron into battle.
2 men with me now! Get that beach under control!
Yet a squad of even these above-average stormtroopers simply could not hit this one slow-walking person at what seems like quite a close distance. And the entire time, this character, who the movie has told us is strong with the Force, is chanting about the Force in a way that is obviously meant to help protect him, and thus help him achieve his goal of getting across this incredibly dangerous area. This character is presumably not Force-sensitive, and he gets killed instantly.
I'm going!
Yet Chirrut is able to get the entire way, and when he is killed after he achieves his goal, it is because a trooper shoots not him, but an explosive barrel near him. The message is clear. This character cannot be hit in this moment. And we know it's not because he is invulnerable like the characters in the original trilogy seem to be, because he dies anyway. And it's not because the stormtroopers have bad aim. The moment one of the troopers thinks to fire at the explosive barrel instead of at him, he hits it first time. It is because the Force is protecting him, somehow diverting any blaster bolts that would have hit him. And since either Luke or Leia are almost always part of the group that the stormtroopers are failing to hit in the original trilogy, the logical conclusion of having this information is that the Force was protecting them too. To me, this is sheer brilliance. And to top it off, the way the scene is executed also adds to the emotionality of the film. Since these characters' deaths are not shrugged off by the narrative, they are not treated as disposable, their end depicted instead in an emotionally impactful way that is in line with their established characterization throughout the film.
The Force is with me, and one with the Force.
Dalek is the 6th episode of the first season of the modern Doctor Who series. Its placement within the first season is key to the decisions made on it that this video is about. So to give some context, let me provide some background here. Doctor Who is a British family-oriented science fiction TV series that began in 1963, with the first episode airing on the 23rd of November, the day after the assassination of JFK in the United States. It was so widely popular and beloved that it became a huge cultural icon around the world, and it is also famous for how long it ran, with the original series going for 26 years, all the way to 1989 before cancellation. There had been a couple of failed attempts to bring the show back, and a TV movie made in 1996. But in 2005, a new Doctor Who show began airing, to critical acclaim and high ratings. And while it was a great idea to reboot Doctor Who, doing so brought with it some baggage. Noticing a pattern? Showrunner Russell T Davies was of course a huge fan of the original show, but he also felt strongly that his new show would need to be different in some important ways to do with the writing being more sophisticated. He wanted his show to have more heart than the original series, which oftentimes felt cold and emotionless. Even many of the best serials were not very emotionally effective and felt kind of detached in this regard. Though there were of course a few exceptions to this, like the death of Adric. In my opinion, Davies was successful in this endeavour on a level that can scarcely be exaggerated. New Who has heart. It has a lot of emotional depth, but it's also more sophisticated in general, more aware. While the plotting in the original series often felt very generic and formulaic, and was riddled with basic inconsistencies and characters making poor decisions for plot convenience reasons, the new show feels like a lot more care and thought went into it. Evidence of both these elements of the new show's writing can be seen being established in the first season, especially in Dalek. For those that somehow don't know, the Daleks are the original show's most famous and iconic villains. While it could be said that the Master is the Doctor Who's nemesis, the Daleks are his most formidable foe, and they're the only species he actually hates, aside from his own.
Fear me. I've killed hundreds of Time Lords.
Fear me. I've killed all of them.
In short, they were an immensely important element for Davies to get right in their first appearance on his new show. The reintroduction of the Daleks being a failure was akin to the reintroduction of the franchise in general being a failure. The Daleks are just such a hugely important part of what Doctor Who is. Davies knew exactly how important their reintroduction was, and boy did he nail it. Now, I just need to make a quick note of something here. The writing in this episode is credited to Robert Sherman. Davies hired Sherman because of an audio play that Sherman had written in which there was only one surviving Dalek. Aside from those in the writer's room and involved in the writing process in general for the episode, nobody knows exactly who wrote what, and what idea or line of dialogue is attributed to what person. For this reason, it is my practice to attribute everything to the showrunner, whether I'm talking about something good or something bad. Because that's the job. They're responsible. When it's good, they get the credit. When it's bad, they get the blame. So on this channel, in situations such as this, they are who I will attribute things to unless I happen to have access to some specific insight for whatever reason, which isn't the case here. Dalek remains, to this day, my favourite single-episode Doctor Who story, narrowly beating out Season 3's Blink, which, considering the first season has overall not aged well, and there's a lot of evidence in it that Davies and his writing team were still finding their feet throughout, meaning that it stands now as one of the weaker seasons, is really saying something. Davies understood that in order to do the Daleks' reputation and status justice, he would need to address some of the most major criticisms of them that had developed over the years. The Daleks debuted in the very first season of the original Doctor Who in 1963. Their design was considered highly innovative and original at the time, and their ruthless, murderous mentality was dark and even scary. They made a big impression on multiple generations of kids and adults, not just in Britain but around the world. But over the years, the sheen of uniqueness melted away, and the hokier elements of the design slowly came to dominate the pop cultural view of the Daleks. Things like the fact that one of their limb attachments was literally just a plunger. A plunger that was never used for anything, probably because the Daleks have no need for human toilets or other plumbing technology. Check out this clip of comedian Eddie Izzard talking about the plunger.
Anyway, yeah, so that was the Daleks. And they were very scary because they had a death ray. If you remember how they were designed, they had a death ray. We will exterminate, we are the Daleks, we. They were quite sort of tremorously as well. We will. And on one side of the death ray, on the other side, they had, of course, a plunger. We will exterminate, everyone will be exterminated, unless we decide. Yes, extermination, essentially, that's... Why have we got this? What's... All right, exterminate, what's a plunger? Why have we got plunger? You will die, or... Do you have any plumbing? What? Death or plumbing? Death or plumbing? Death or plumbing? Death or plumbing? Plumbing, mainly plumbing. Okay, plumbing, I suppose. Do you have ink? Do you have ink? We can put ink around and do circles, you know, do shapes.
And not only did their design lose its intimidating quality over the decades, the whole space Nazi thing stopped being viewed as scary and came to be seen as cliched and trite. And there was also what I have taken to calling the too many Daleks problem. The Daleks had appeared so frequently and in such huge numbers that they had become unthreatening, by virtue of being defeated every time regardless of their numbers. If a new Doctor Who show was to be successful, it had to address these things and fix them, but not in a way that would change the Daleks too much, since they were, despite the criticisms, nevertheless still massively iconic and core to the franchise. The showrunner after Davies, Stephen Moffat, once went too far with changes to the Daleks and was heavily criticised for it. So Davies had a real problem on his hands back in 2005. He needed to update the Daleks and completely change the way they were viewed in pop culture, bringing it back to how effective they were originally. But he also couldn't really change them that much. He looked at all these stereotypical criticisms and decided to actively address every one of them in a way that not only subverted the criticisms and made the Daleks better, but provided the very basis for the story, tone, and themes of their reintroduction episode itself. The first major departure from previous appearances of the Daleks is that this time there was only a single Dalek. Incidentally, I kinda wonder if the title is a nod to the movie Alien, though I suspect it is probably just a reference to this line of dialogue from the episode.
Now I know your name. Dalek. Speak to me, Dalek.
Or maybe to this line.
If you can't kill, then what are you good for, Dalek? What's the point of you?
For this one, I don't know if he made the decision because the Daleks had become unthreatening, or if it was just because of his Time War series arc. I suspect it was probably both. By which I mean the overarching, ongoing plot line set up by Davies right from the first episode of the new show onwards. A plot line that is still of major importance to the show now at the time of writing this script. So now I'm going to take you through the episode and show you how Russell T Davies turned negative criticism on its head and used it to make his show even better. The Doctor and his companion at the time, Rose Tyler, arrive in the year 2012, which is the near future for Rose, in a sort of underground museum of alien technology, chasing a distress signal that is so weak that they are unable to tell who is sending it. There is one moment in this first scene that I'd like to mention, though this is more of a dodge of previous criticism than an actual subversion. The Doctor notices the head of a Cyberman in one of the display cases.
Oh, look at you.
What is it?
An old friend of mine. Well, enemy. The stuff of nightmares reduced to an exhibit. I'm getting old.
Is that where the signal's coming from?
Nah, stone dead. The signal's alive.
The Cybermen have a lot of similarity to the Daleks, and they are also one of the most well-known of the other villain species in the show. They are the perfect choice to feature in this alien museum, but there's a big problem with that. The classic show's Cybermen always looked really hokey and cheap. Most of this was in the body, however, so they chose to just use the head, so they could dodge having to show such a low production value costume in their show, while also not having to redesign the Cybermen for an episode that isn't even about them. The head is still below what would be considered passable in a show like Doctor Who today, but the fact that it's in a museum negates the potential impact this might have otherwise had on the suspension of disbelief, and makes that fact feel appropriate. Sometimes doing a slight tap on the fourth wall stops a potential crack from appearing in it. It acknowledges the strong nostalgic feelings adult viewers of this new show have about the classic series, which is going to be especially strong while watching the earlier episodes of the new show for the first time. And it does this without being in any way derogatory to it. There's no, look at how lame this old design was, in this moment. It's reverential and respectful to the Cybermen, and subtextually to the classic series in general. The Doctor is then taken to where the as-yet unknown alien is being held. In the preceding scenes, the writer tells the audience that whatever this entity is, it's dangerous.
Here, you better put these on. The last guy that touched it burst into flames.
I won't touch it then.
Then they let the Doctor into the cell.
Look, I'm sorry about this. Mr. Van Staten might think he's clever, but never mind him. I've come to help. I'm the Doctor. Impossible.
The Doctor! Exterminate! Exterminate! Let me out! Exterminate!
Sure, it's gonna kill him.
It's talking. You are an enemy of the Daleks! You must be destroyed!
It's not working. Fantastic! Oh, fantastic!
This is great, making the Dalek powerless when the audience sees it for the first time, through the Doctor meeting it. His reaction tells you that Daleks in general are a murderous and very dangerous lot, but it not being an immediate threat to him enables them to have a very interesting conversation. This Dalek being currently weak and vulnerable does nothing to lessen the information that the Daleks in general are neither weak nor vulnerable, but the opposite. Neither does it create a fixed sense of this Dalek's status going forward in the narrative, by which I mean it can easily be undone without any audience fallout. This is good writing. And speaking of good writing, the Doctor then informs the Dalek that its entire people were destroyed during the Time War, that it somehow escaped from, and that it is the only currently known surviving Dalek. And also that the same is true of the Doctor. His people, the Time Lords, were also wiped out except for him.
I am alone in the universe.
Yep.
So are you. We are the same.
We're not the same, I'm not...
No, wait. Maybe we are. You're right, yeah, okay. You've got a point. Because I know what to do. I know what should happen. I know what you deserve. Exterminate.
Why should I? You never did.
This adds dimension to the Doctor. In the previous 5 episodes of the show, he was always against violence no matter what, preferring to find a solution that didn't involve killing whenever even remotely possible. Yet with this new being, this Dalek, he is not only willing to kill it, but seems to actively want to, and all within a couple of minutes. This is a sharp departure for the character, and as a viewer this was a fascinating development to this otherwise peaceful, gun-hating character. After that, the Doctor is imprisoned, without the knowledge of his companion Rose, who then goes to meet the Dalek herself, without being warned by the Doctor about what the Daleks are capable of.
I am dying.
No, we can help.
I welcome death. But I am glad that before I die, I met a human who was not afraid.
Isn't there anything I can do?
My race is dead. I shall die alone.
Rose, no!
Kinetic material extrapolated. Initiate cellular reconstruction!
Her reaction to the Dalek and what she does to it in the following scene make perfect sense given when this episode takes place during her character arc. She's in the, wow, everything is so exciting and fun part of being a new companion to the Doctor, when most companions are still deeply naive about some of the horrors that are out there in the universe. This episode is her first real exposure to that, starting an arc that ends with her basically becoming a soldier in a fight against a massive Dalek force threatening to destroy reality itself. Compare how she is in scenes from this episode with how she acts here.
Trouble. It's only just beginning.
So far, we've seen the start of Davies' efforts to make the Daleks intimidating and scary again, something he does progressively over the course of the episode. But now we come to him addressing the first more specific criticism, that of the plunger arm that I mentioned earlier.
What the hell have you done?
What you gonna do? Sucker me to death?
So now we can no longer say that the plunger is just a lame prop somebody shoved onto a Dalek. It has at least one purpose. It can kill people by compressing their heads, as you can see again here from Season 2's Doomsday.
Speech is not necessary. We will extract brainwaves.
Don't. I'll tell you everything you need. No, don't!
But Davies isn't done with the plunger. He then goes on to show this.
Doctor, it's all my fault.
I've sealed the compartment. It can't get out. That lock's got 1 billion combinations.
Dalek's a genius. It can calculate 1,000 billion combinations in 1 second flat.
The first use of the plunger is more of an on-the-nose, self-aware nod to the criticism, whereas this time he is showing that this plunger thing really does have a genuine meaningful use for Daleks, and their ability to interact with various kinds of technology from other species. This isn't just a funny nod, this is a legitimate subversion of the criticism, and a creation of something that makes practical sense for the Daleks to want to have. And the Doctor's dialogue in this scene adds to the growing sense in the viewer's mind of how dangerous this being might be. A sense which is about to be thrown into overdrive. First with this quick moment of the Dalek using electricity to charge up its weapons and also somehow physically repair itself. But much more importantly is this following scene, when the Dalek leaves that area and goes out into the hallway for its first confrontation with armed humans.
Civilians, let them through!
Cover the north wall! Red Division maintain suppressing fire along the perimeter! Blue Division,
This is my favourite sequence in the episode, and it is when, for me at least, the show successfully communicated just how deadly and formidable the Daleks are in this new version of Doctor Who. The moment when you are shown the invisible disintegration field around the Dalek, and how completely useless human weapons are against it, still impresses me to this day whenever I watch it. The other thing it does is explain the internal logic of why there are no bullet impacts, ricochets, etc. on the Dalek itself, not just in this episode, but for any time since this, and before in the original series. And the way it kills the soldiers is such a weird, menacing combination of casual and ruthless. It almost seems like it is having fun here. This part also serves the purpose of informing the viewer that the Daleks can now swivel their top and middle sections around, making them functionally more sophisticated in a way that doesn't take anything away from their original design, indeed it enhances it. Next up we go into the Daleks' space Nazi worldview, something that is going to be subverted later in the episode so as to make it more interesting. But in order to do that, first they must establish it.
I thought you were the great expert, Doctor. If you're so impressive, then why not just reason with this Dalek? It must be willing to negotiate. There must be something it needs. Everything needs something.
What's the nearest town?
Salt Lake City.
Population?
1 million.
All dead. If the Dalek gets out, it'll murder every living creature. That's all it needs.
But why would it do that?
Because it honestly believes they should die. Human beings are different, and anything different is wrong. It's the ultimate in racial cleansing. And you, Van Statten, you've let it loose!
You get a clear impression of the fascistic nature of the Daleks here, which on its own isn't a fresh take on the nature of Daleks at all, but combined with what the episode does later, it becomes that. And next we come to what is arguably the most important single subversion of criticism in the whole episode. The most famous criticism of the Daleks, hands down, is the fact that their wheeled nature means they could never go upstairs in the original show. The writers got around this by simply never putting a Dalek in a situation in which going upstairs was needed. There was always a ramp, or the buildings were single story, that kind of thing. This criticism is so famous that if you're British, it is an extremely safe bet you've heard it before. And it's a pretty damn safe bet if you're from one of the Commonwealth countries too. And like the Death Star's vulnerability was for Rogue One, this is the one pop culture criticism they had to address or else risk compromising the whole piece. So they did. But before I show you that, first check out these example clips of the criticism.
Well, imagine trying to chase a heroin addict up a small staircase on a horse. It's ridiculous.
It was the heroin addicts would know to head for the small staircase.
It's like trying to police a country with Daleks.
Which would never work with the disabled access we got now. The Daleks can get everywhere.
Yeah.
Jimmy,
you saying that you think that disabled access is a Dalek conspiracy?
Yes. That is exactly what I'm saying.
Think back, if you will, to what the world was like before wheelchair ramps. There were stairs everywhere. And what would you do if the Daleks invaded? You'd run up the bloody stairs, wouldn't you? Daleks can't climb stairs. Piss off, you Dalek, I'm up the stairs. But with ramps, with bloody ramps everywhere. There'll be no escape. Mark Arthur's words, the Daleks will inherit the Earth.
And now here's how they were addressed.
Stairs. It's more like it. Hasn't got legs, it's stuck.
It's coming. Get out!
Great big alien death machine, defeated by a flight of stairs.
Now listen to me. I demand that you return to your cage. If you want to negotiate, then I can guarantee that Mr. Van Statten will be willing to talk. I accept that we imprisoned you, and maybe that was wrong. But people have died, and that stops right now. The killing stops. Have you got that? I demand that you surrender. Is that clear?
Elevate!
Oh my God.
Adam, get her out of here.
Come with us, you can't stop it.
Someone's got to try. Now get out! Don't look back, just run!
And compare that earlier QI clip to this one from years later.
Now, what can we do to stop the killer robots?
Ooh.
Now, you may say that's
Go
a silly
upstairs.
robot. Go upstairs. The Daleks have shown that doesn't work now. They can hover.
Next, the security forces set up an ambush point. And here we have the first mention of another common criticism of the Daleks, although this one is not always brought up negatively and is often more like just an observation than a criticism. I'm referring to what the Daleks even are exactly. Are they robots? Or are they organisms? If you ask this question to someone who's only watched the classic series, the answer is probably going to be a resounding I don't know.
Aim for the dome, the head, the eyepiece. That's the weak spot.
Thank you, Doctor, but I think I know how to fight one singleton robot.
A lot of people did think the Daleks were just robots, and as the criticism reflects, there was a sense that the metal had a kind of old, decrepit and flimsy look, even kind of rusted. We'll get back to that shortly. Let's see how the Dalek handles the ambush. Again, the writers choose a method of killing that strikes the viewer as very ruthless and detached, one that leaves an impression. And this time, the element of efficiency of killing is added to the mix, something which is a common theme in depictions of Nazi-like villains, space or otherwise. And now we get to the last major element of subversion, one which I alluded to earlier in the scene establishing the fascist worldview of the Daleks. Well, here the writing begins to turn that on its head.
I'm begging you, don't kill him, you didn't kill me.
But why not? Why are you alive? My function is to kill. What am I? What am I?
And in this, the climactic scene of the episode, the subversion is brought home in a big way.
Get out of the way! Rose, get out of the way, now!
No, because I won't let you do this.
That thing killed hundreds of people.
It's not the one pointing the gun at me.
I've got to do this. I've got to end it. The Daleks destroyed my home, my people. I've got nothing left.
Look at it.
What's it doing?
It's the sunlight, that's all it wants.
But it can't.
It couldn't kill Van Staten. It couldn't kill me. It's changing. What about you, Doctor? What the hell are you changing into?
I am the last of the Daleks.
You're not even that. Rose did more than regenerate you. You've absorbed her DNA. You're mutated.
So what?
Something new. I'm sorry.
Isn't that better?
Not for a Dalek.
I can feel so many ideas, so much darkness. Rose, give me orders. Order me to die.
I can't do that.
This is not life. This is sickness. I shall not be like you. Order my destruction. Obey! Obey! Obey!
Do it.
Are you frightened, Rose Tyler?
Yeah.
So am I. It's midnight.
This scene blew me away when I first saw it, and this moment still gives me chills every time I watch it.
This is not life. This is sickness.
This episode is so good that it made me feel genuine sadness for a being that commits suicide due to its racial hatred, making it impossible for it to go on living, as impure and mutated. This being that hates everything that isn't a Dalek becomes genetically altered enough so that by its own metric it is no longer a Dalek. Then it hates itself. It doesn't see potential in new ideas and new feelings. It sees mutation and abomination. And it does what Daleks do to non-Daleks. Exterminate. Like I said before, on its own the space Nazi thing is pretty lame. It's been done to death, even though the Daleks were created long before that was the case. And perhaps the most stifling thing about it for a show like the one Davies had set out to make is that it's morally simplistic. So instead of being limited by that, he and Robert Sherman crafted this scene, and turned the most boring thing about the Daleks into the most interesting thing about them. As someone who has memories of seeing the Daleks in the classic series as a child, watching this was like seeing a square become a cube. The two-dimensional became three-dimensional, and that's just wonderful. Well, I hope you liked the video. Be sure to check out this mini-sode in which I analyze a plot thread in the pilot episode of The Walking Dead by Frank Darabont, and in particular a scene in which elements of said plot thread are set up by being layered into dialogue. And I also have a channel trailer with 2 variants that you can see here. Thank you and have a wonderful day.